Welcome to Simply Why, a podcast about money and purpose, where we pull back the curtain on running a financial advisory business focused on providing intentional advice to couples and families. I'm Dennis Morton.
And I'm Katie Brown. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in.
Hi, and welcome back to the Simply Why podcast. Because we're recording from home, you won't hear the traffic that you might usually hear in the background, but there might be other things, like my office door. It creaks a lot, so if anybody tries to come in, it'll sound like a Vincent Price movie for a minute as they open it up.
You know there is such a thing as WD-40.
No, I'd rather make obscure Vincent Price references. It just keeps... It's not going to be lost on the audience. There's a certain demographic that'll pick up on that. That remembers the Tingler. Anyway, so this morning we had some time to sit back and we did our strategic time, and we've been revisiting recasting our vision, some of the foundations of our advisory practice, and rethinking some things. And we wanted to revisit today our ideal client persona. That was our conversation. And we started getting into some pretty interesting ground that we wanted to cover today on the topic of not a demographic element of the clients that we work with, what their income levels are, investments, all those things, but more the psychographic side. And we got into the topic of leadership today and how important leadership as a concept is in the effective relationship between an advisor and their clients. You want to talk about kind of where we went with that, Katie?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we veered off course a little bit from the traditional, the ideal client works here and has 2.5 kids and is 5 years from retirement, and really thought about who we work best with amongst our client base and where we feel like we make the biggest contribution and provide the most amount of value. And we recognized that, first of all, it goes both ways. I think the clients that we tend to work the best with are ones that we learn just as much from in the process. But we also recognize a very consistent thread across many of our clients is the leadership role that they hold within their professional lives, whether they are business owners, whether they're professionals, executives. It can show up in a lot of different ways. Even breaking that down further, we went down the path of, okay, but what does that leadership role mean? How does that show up? And why does that seem to align well with the work that we do and our ability to build that strong relationship? Some of the things that we realize that they do in a daily basis, and I think aligns well with us, is thinking strategically about the future, showing up with a growth mindset, leaning on other professionals around them. And Dennis, if we kind of crack each of those open a little bit more, what were some of the observations that we had?
We literally brought up a list of all of our clients, and you and I just kind of highlighted a few of them and say, what's the common thread here? And they all do think strategically. I think when we think of where we've been at our best and yielded the best results, they're people who know that we're not going to solve for this today, but we can talk big picture and how all of it comes together, and it makes sense to them because it's the language that they see when they're successful in their own lives, when they're running their businesses, when they're an executive, when they're a teacher, whatever it might be. They're in a role where people appreciate that it's not a quick fix. It is a very strategic process that we go through. And it's something that's very hard to teach. It's something that when somebody walks in, a lot of times they either have it or they don't. It comes back to literally a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset and how they show up. And I think that's sometimes when we determine fit, like, who do you work best with? We haven't always put that language around it, but it seems to be very true.
Mm-hmm. Thinking strategically too. I think something that I have picked up on in client meetings is we'll start to have a conversation and then there's an intentional pause for just a minute to say, okay, what are we really trying to accomplish here? What is going to make this fulfilling? What is the purpose? I think that pause in that process of identifying the key elements, the purposeful elements, that's something that consistently shows up with clients that we tend to click very well with.
Mm-hmm. Comes back to even the title of this podcast. That pause, I think, represents the why. There's a sense of why, and there's also a sense of responsibility that when we hear a client pause in the middle of a planning conversation, in the middle of an investing conversation, you get the sense of, I want to take full responsibility for this. What's the next thing I need to know or ask or understand or appreciate so that we can move on this together? They're not racing forward just to try and get to the end or to check a block. It's a very thoughtful, I think that's what you're getting at. There's just a thoughtful nature to it.
And you know what else? Because they're not racing ahead trying to get to the end, they are taking the time to appreciate the journey. And we often talk about that too. Like there is no end finite point. It's a matter of this is all a process, this is all a journey. And I think that requires pauses and the opportunity to step back and look out further.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we take it seriously in our role as advisors and leaders that sometimes we need to reframe the conversation. That when you're having a conversation with a client who's a successful leader in their own right, whether that's in their business, in their family, or in the community, it's okay to check in and pause and say, what's the purpose behind this? Are we doing this for the right reasons? And also being willing to step in and reframe. Like if somebody comes in and says, how many dollars do I need to retire? That's not exactly the right question to be asking or the conversation to be having. We're going to pivot that in a little bit different way. And again, looking at the people that we work best with, they appreciate that, the willingness to say, it's not so much about this, it's more about that. Let's put our energy in this direction. And that's a leadership exercise.
It is. And also, it's the idea of leaning on other professionals. Sometimes when we get to those moments of pausing too, we might recognize there's another skill set that we need at the table, and we need another perspective to help frame out where we're headed. Understanding and embracing that at some point, somebody may reach their limitations, but we need to be open minded enough to bring some additional resources to the table.
Yes. I was kind of thinking through just the attributes or some of the characteristics of conversations that are most beneficial when we're talking ideal client persona. And I think humility is one of them. To
Mhm.
say, I don't know is a good answer. And,
Mhm.
and about a lot of things. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know the answer to that particular question that's someone else's area of expertise. And feel free to bring them in. I think if someone comes into us thinking that they know it all, or we walk into a room thinking that we know it all, we're probably going to miss something. So I think that humility is really important.
And that gets to the different mindsets too.
Oh, yeah.
When you talk about coming into a room with the assumption of I have all the information that I need to know, that's very much a fixed mindset, which may close out the possibilities of working through challenges or accepting outside feedback. And it may be an inhibitor to success. And
Hmm.
so showing up, however, with a growth mindset, you're embracing that. You're leaning on others. You're actually looking for that feedback, both positive and negative, to try to get to that next level. And so I love that piece also kind of added to who we work best with, that growth mindset. We do our best to show up with that, but every once in a while the humility kicks in and we realize, oh, I made a total assumption about this. I need to take a step back and kind of open up my mind further.
Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, because we've had we're doing some exploration on that these days here at Morton Brown.
Yeah, and actually, there's a really fantastic graphic put out by Carol Dweck. She's a PhD who's done a lot of writing around the two mindsets. Excuse me. We might have mentioned before working with Brian Portnoy at Shaping Wealth. We're working with a cohort of financial advisors, actually internationally. I have somebody in my group from London, which I'm really excited about.
I have a Canadian. Yeah.
Nice. There we go. From all over. And we're all trying to figure out how can we best communicate with clients, with individuals, because so much of what we do goes far beyond the numbers. I mean, I don't know about you, Dennis, but I'll sit in a meeting for an hour and a half and we'll talk for an hour and 15 minutes about things that might not be numbers driven, and
Yes.
working through that and showing up in a place where we can be empathetic and as understanding as possible to what's going on in somebody's lives and how we can help support them on their journey. One of the items in there was to go in and read up a little bit on Carol Dweck and her perspective on the two mindsets.
Yeah, the thing that really jumped out at me, if you think in terms of how a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset would approach a challenge, a fixed mindset is going to try and avoid challenges, seek the easier path, find the quick solution. Whereas someone with a growth mindset embraces the challenges, recognizes that the path is not always going to be straight or free of obstacles, but those are going to be opportunities to grow. Those are going to be opportunities to expand knowledge and everything else, and hence bringing in outside resources. Maybe I can't do this by myself, but seeking out expertise is a valuable thing to do.
Even the effort that's put in behind it.
Hmm.
Sometimes I think if you have that fixed mindset, you're not necessarily willing to do the work. Whereas if you have the growth mindset, not only are you willing to do the work, but you're excited to learn through the process.
Right. The things that we talk about, especially when it comes to money, one of the reasons why we focus on the soft side of wealth management, of financial lives here on the podcast, is because there are so many applicable principles from the rest of life that if only we could apply them well to our financial life, we would increase the odds of success. Things like physical health or building strength. If you try and get really strong in one day, it's not going to happen. But if you compound and build up on the process over time and commit to it, that's the path to mastery. That's what makes it sustainable and yields the actual results that you want. The same things apply to the work that we do in financial planning.
It's a good analogy.
It's the only one I've got for today. And even the word criticism might be a little bit harsh, but a willingness to poke holes in things. If somebody comes in and says, Dennis, I see this plan. However, I think you're missing something here. I think there's a concept, there's a life event, there's something that's not illustrated properly. I could take that criticism and say, no, I did it right, and this is the way it should be. Or I can, have that confidence to question what we've put in and a willingness to say maybe there is a different way of thinking about this, or maybe there are multiple aspects to it that maybe I don't fully appreciate. And the same thing goes for our clients. That's why it works both ways, is to say, maybe this risk that you think is not particularly applicable to you, maybe it's a blind spot and we haven't thought through the extent of the consequences if it were to occur. And no one taking offense to that criticism or that critical thought applied to what it is that you're doing together.
Mm-hmm. So Dennis, this exercise that we did this morning, kind of thinking through ideally who we work well with, how does this apply to other people out there? How could this be flipped around to be a worthwhile exercise for people in their lives?
I think what you want to think about in terms of your leadership, if you see yourself or aspire to be a leader for your family, or a leader in your job, or a leader in your community, there's a lot that you can learn from working with or seeking out great professionals. We do it all the time. It's the reason why we have a coach. It's the reason why we work with other great accounting and legal and everything else professionals, that you should expect your professionals to elevate that standard and look for it, actively look for it. I think anybody in engaging with a financial advisor should think in terms of all of this is bigger than us. There's more than just me involved. There's more than just you involved. There's more than just the client involved. There's the ripple effects for a family, for a legacy, for how they show up. So effectively, we want to be grounded in something bigger than ourselves, have that sense of humility. And what we've found is that when we have permission to talk about that with our clients, everyone gets excited. There's an energy that comes out, and we should expect that energy. You should surround yourself with people who have that kind of energy. These are dream big conversations. When you sit down and talk with your financial advisor, it's not about what amount of money, what pile of dollars do I need. It's about something more aspirational. It's about showing up as your best self, and that's what leaders do, and they work towards something.
I'd like that you brought up that grounded in community too, because you're right. Many of the clients that we work with, it goes beyond them and oftentimes beyond their family, and it comes down to different things that they're passionate about. So whether it's supporting different community groups that they're in, different organizations that they're involved in, faith organizations, just community efforts.
When it comes to engaging in the financial conversation, it's not a matter of taking off one hat and putting on another. What we're seeing is that consistency, that the best people at implementing their financial plans are the ones who use the leadership lessons that they apply in life and community and job and everything else, and bring those same characteristics into the conversation with us. And we relish that. We want to foster that, support that. Because sometimes I think people walk in and they expect, I have to speak a different language. I have to speak financial language now, or I have to have a different persona when I'm talking about money. Not true. There's
You
a
are
consistency.
so right. Sorry,
Yeah.
didn't mean to cut you off, but you are
No.
so right.
Mhm.
People often will show up and say, I don't really know anything about finances. I don't know what this jargon is. And sometimes, depending on how they show up, sometimes that's something that they feel very vulnerable about and that they're nervous to admit it. And the reality is most people don't know about the nuances of finance. We are still learning. Every single day we're learning just some of the nuances out there. And so to be able to set that aside and to even take the dollars out of the conversation and then have a conversation around what are you trying to accomplish? Okay, now let's look at your resources and figure out how you can do that, whether it's within your family, out of your family, in the community, anywhere else.
Yeah, if you say, well, I can't draw upon other financial experiences to make me good at this, you can draw upon leadership experience. You know about what being a good parent is, you know, about being a good supervisor, a good boss, or whatever, a good board of directors and a trustee, or whatever the role or responsibility might be. Take lessons from that. And if you're just saying, I know what bad leadership looks like and not apply those principles to finance, that's a good start. That's a great start. And start taking some
Yeah.
of the positive lessons to say, I know what good leadership involves communication. You know, maybe I should communicate better with my spouse and my family about our financial circumstances. That's a great start. Do that.
Mhm.
A lot of people, for all they get right about the money, they don't get right the communication and the things that we know to be good leadership traits.
And every example that you gave has more than one person in the
Wow.
picture and sitting at the
Yes.
table.
Yep. Leadership's never in a vacuum.
No, never.
Yeah. I've been toying around with this idea of what the desired outcome is for any endeavor in the leadership sphere or in finance. And I think you want to have just ripples of success. Your pebble dropped into the pond creates ripples of success for the future. You know, we're in the end of the NFL season right now, and there's a lot of talk of coaching trees. That NFL coaches have coaching trees. You know, their ripples of success are that people that worked under them became head coaches in their own right and create ripples of success. A big part of a growth mindset is, can I take what I've done really well, be that in my relationship with money, my health, anything else, have it create positive ripples in my sphere because there are always other people involved.
I think that's a really great thing to leave with people to ponder over.
This exercise of revisiting some of the foundational elements of how we built and designed Morton Brown around our ideal client persona, the people we work best with, it's sparking some great conversations. If there are other things that we're not thinking about or you think are really important for a firm like ours to discuss, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to have the conversation. So until next time.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Simply Why, a podcast about money and purpose. We hope you enjoyed getting to know us, how we approach leading a financial advisory practice, and the work we do every day to help families and couples make important financial decisions.
Morton Brown Family Wealth is an SEC-registered investment advisor. This podcast is designed for educational and informational purposes and not intended as investment advice. More information can be found at www.mortonbrownfw.com.
Did you see that gift that I sent over of Homer Simpson?
Yeah.
Do you remember that song?
I know.
It's only the greatest jingle in the history of television.
I didn't actually play it. I didn't make that connection. Just saw the picture quickly. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Plow, that's my name. That name again is Mr. Plow. It is a great episode.